Welcome to another Rusty Rails rail fanning adventure. On today's Rail Fanning Adventure, we continue the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum Special Part 3. The next morning, August 9th, 2020, we got to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, and the train was already in the station. Pulling the train that day was SW-1200, number 606, a diesel locomotive. We didn't catch the train pull out for the first trip, but we did catch it run the Y, after it returned to Grand Junction. After running the Y, we took a ride on the Missionary Ridge Local behind 606.
Welcome aboard the Missionary Ridge Local. My name is Zach. I'll be your tour guide for this journey back in time. Your conductor today is Dave, your trainman is Evan, and your engineer is Andrew. Now before we depart, I am required to state, by order of the Hamilton County Department of Health, all passengers are required to wear a mask for the duration of the ride, and please stay seated in the seats assigned to you by the train crew. Now also before we depart, I'd also like to wish a very happy birthday to JW, turning 4 years old today. So everyone give JW a happy birthday. Now for those of you who have not ridden with us before, what this trip will consist of is approximately a little under a 1 hour trip. It will consist of about 15 to 20 minutes of travel in each direction on the 3 miles of track donated by the Southern Railway, and a 20 to 30 minute layover in East Chattanooga where we will have a demonstration of our antique turntable. Now everyone get a push on the seat ahead of you so we can help get a head start here. Now everyone go ahead and have a good look at Grand Junction here as we depart, because we will be returning in a day or two. A week at the most. Now you will be traveling on one of the first railroads into Chattanooga today. This line was completed in 1859 by the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad. The ET&G would merge with a number of other railroads over time to become the famous Southern Railway in 1894. Now, the Southern would continue to use this 3 mile section of track until they abandoned it in the 1950s for reasons I'll explain later in our journey. They would build a new line to the north, which you can see to the right of the train now, and that line is still used today by the Southern Railway's successor, the Norfolk Southern Corporation. And then, of course, later on, after the Southern Railway did abandon this line, they would eventually donate this 3 mile stretch of track to us here at the museum. Now, a bit of history about the 2 cars you all are riding in today. For those of you with the red wristband, you are riding in car 661, built in 1947 by the American Car Foundry, or ACF, for the Central Georgia Railroad, used on a passenger train named the Nancy Hanks 2. Now, if you have a green wristband, you are riding in the 906. It's also the car I am speaking from. This is the 906, built in 1924 by the Pullman Company for the Central Georgia Railroad. If you have a look to the left of the train, you will see a gravel road. Now that gravel road is the roadbed for the original 1859 right-of-way. The line was elevated to its current height and position in the first decade of the 20th century by the Southern Railway due to numerous occasions of flooding. Now, of course, Chattanooga did used to be extremely prone to flooding before the construction of the Chickamauga Dam during the Great Depression. As an example of this flooding on the left, once you see a clearing in the trees, you're going to see a sign. Next to that sign is a tree with a yellow line painted on it. That yellow line represents the high water mark. And that high water mark indicates the high water mark from the Great Flood of 1867. At 9 feet above the track, it explains why this line had to be elevated. We're now crossing our first bridge over South Chickamauga Creek. In the water below, you may spot some turtles, river otters, or geese. Now, just to the left is some stone piers. Those stone piers mark the side of the original bridge. Now, on top of those stone piers would have been a wooden decking that the rails would have run on. Now, the original bridge in that location was made entirely of stone and was washed away in a flood in 1861. Unfortunately, an engineer did not see that bridge had washed away in time. And, well, let's just say his train went for a swim. does run from Atlanta to Chattanooga and is still owned by the state of Georgia today. And they currently lease it out to CSX. That line is also home to a very famous story from the Civil War. Some of you may have heard of it, and that would be the Great Locomotive Chase. For those of you who have not heard of it, the Great Locomotive Chase is the story of Union spy James Andrews and 23 others known as the Andrews Raiders. They disguised themselves as civilians and made their way to Big Shanty, Georgia, which is today Kennesaw, Georgia, and stole a locomotive named General while it was on a fuel, water, and mill stop. They planned to race the General all the way north to Chattanooga while burning bridges and destroying track and telegraph wires along the way in an effort to sever the crucial Confederate supply artery. They were pursued by the General's conductor, William Fuller, and a locomotive he commandeered named the Texas. Now, the Texas was facing south, so for the duration of that chase, he had to run the locomotive in reverse. The General ran out of fuel just north of Ringgold, Georgia, about 18 miles down the tracks from Chattanooga. All the men were caught. 8 of them, including Andrews himself, are unfortunately hanged in Atlanta. They are today buried at the Chattanooga National Cemetery around a bronze replica of the General, just a few miles from our current location. The rest of the men either escaped prison or were exchanged for Confederate prisoners. Now, Andrews Raiders would be very first to ever receive the Medal of Honor, but Andrews himself did not, as he was a civilian and not eligible. Now, if you would like to know more on that topic, there are many books and films based on that event, including Buster Keaton's silent film The General, and one of Walt Disney's lesser-known films from the 1950s, also titled The Great Locomotive Chase. And of course, both locomotives involved in that chase are still preserved today. The Texas is on display at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the General is on display at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History in Kennesaw, Georgia. Now, for those of you riding in the green car, or the 906 where I'm speaking from, I'd like to point out that you may have noticed that there is a wall separating the two halves of this coach midway through the car. That is because when this coach was built, it was known as a Jim Crow car, used during the era of segregation. Once the Interstate Commerce Commission desegregated the railroads in 1955, most cars of this type had those walls removed. This one was kept intact, and we're not really sure why. Now, when we did acquire the coach, we made the decision to preserve that wall in its original condition as a reminder of a very unfortunate time in our nation's past. Because as the saying goes, if you don't remember your past, you're doomed to repeat it. Now, this coach is believed to be the only coach in operation in the world today with that wall still preserved. We're now crossing our third bridge over Tunnel Boulevard. Originally, that road would have tunneled underneath the railroad, hence its name. When the Southern Railway abandoned this line in the 1950s, the roof of that tunnel was opened up to avoid maintenance costs. After the land was donated to us, we put a bridge over that gap, so today we have Tunnel Boulevard without a tunnel. It is also the only place we can legally run over cars. Now, if you have a look to the right of the train, I will point out some of my favorite trees along the route. See, there's this one, and this one. Oh, and this one here with the leaves on it. I call that one Chris Pine. We're now making our climb up Missionary Ridge, but rather than travel over it, we're going to travel through it. Through the Missionary Ridge Tunnel, also known as the Whiteside Tunnel. This tunnel is 986 feet long, about the length of 3 football fields. It was completed in 1858, dedicated in 1859, and was excavated entirely by pick and shovel, as dynamite was not invented until 1867. So I guess you could say it went off without a bang. Now, this tunnel was excavated from both ends of the ridge, meeting in the middle. When both portals did meet in the middle, they were only off center from each other by 3 inches. During World War II, this tunnel would see as many as 70 trains a day. And of course, this tunnel is the reason that this line was eventually abandoned. After World War II, the railway's equipment was becoming too large to fit through the pre-Civil War era tunnel. Also, at the time, the tunnel was single-track, while the rest of the line was double-track, creating a major bottleneck. So that new line was built to the north and bypasses the ridge altogether. Now, that was the horn of our locomotive you just heard, signaling our approach to the tunnel, meaning we will be entering the tunnel at any moment. So I hope no one on board is scared of the dark. Now, if you do happen to have a flashlight app on your cell phones, I do encourage you to get those out to shine them out the windows and illuminate the tunnel walls as we pass through. While in the tunnel, you may notice we are very close to the tunnel wall. entry, as this is how you would have approached downtown Chattanooga. Right to that tunnel there, with your final destination being Terminal Station, which today has been converted into the Chattanooga Choo Choo Hotel. Now, of course, passenger trains back then would have consisted of more than just passenger coaches. For example, there might have been a baggage car, an RPO car, sleeping car, lounge car, on some trains even a dome car or an observation car. Then on most trains was my favorite, the dining car. Now, speaking of dining car, who knows how a steam locomotive eats? It choo-choo-choos. Now, we have almost reached the end of the 3 miles of track donated by the Southern Railway, so in about another 5 minutes or so, we'll be coming to a stop at our East Chattanooga depot. And once there, you do have the option of either staying on board the train for the layover, or joining me as we do a demonstration of our turntable. Now, I do highly recommend that everyone does join me for this demonstration, because this is one of the only places in the world where you can see still see what's about to happen take place. Now, the depot here will be open as well, and there are restrooms inside. So if you happen to need to use the restroom while at East Chattanooga, those are available in East Chattanooga Depot. Now, please remain seated until once the train has come to a complete stop. We will be unloading the train by car color. So wait until your car color is called before unloading the train. That is to help ensure social distancing. Once you have exited the train, take a left turn down the stairway or the ramp, and just follow that pathway until it ends at the turntable. And once we have everyone gathered around the turntable, we will begin the demonstration. Now, I am also required to ask by order of the Hamilton County Health Department, once at the turntable, please keep a 6-foot distance from those parties around you. And also, when it is time to reboard the train, we also have to ask that you do return to the same car and seat you were in at this time. So please take note of your car color. And if you look above your windows, you will see your seat numbers. The W is for window, the A is for aisle. So please just return to those same seats. Now, if you have a look to the right of the train, you'll see a section of track running down the hill next to these trees. That is the East Chattanooga Belt Line, which later on extends down onto the Chattooga and Chickamauga Railway. And those are the lines we use on some of our longer excursions, such as the Dinner on the Diner, the Chickamauga Turn, and the Somerville Steam Special. It does extend a further 52 miles south to a point just south of Somerville, Georgia.
Check me unloading first, green or red?
Now, if you have a look to the left of the train, you will see a large brick building. That brick building is our warehouse, where many of the artifacts that are not currently on display are stored. And also just next to the train here is a white truck that says Tonka on the side. So I guess you could call that a Tonka truck. Now, this blue car to the left of the train, that is one of our operational dining cars. We did begin our Phase 2 reopening this weekend, meaning that car will be going back into service to serve meals on the train. Now, the large building off in the distance to the left that says Tennessee Valley Railroad Soul Shops on the front, that is our back shop where all of our repairs, maintenance, and restorations do take place. Also coming up on the left, you'll see one of our 2 operational steam locomotives. That locomotive you see is the Southern Railway 4501, built in 1911 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it was built for the Southern Railway as a mainline freight locomotive. Now, some of you probably do know this already, but that was the locomotive destined to pull your trip today, but unfortunately mechanical issues do happen, and we had to sideline that locomotive today and substitute it with a diesel locomotive. And, you know, it's the way I like to put it, when I'm 109 years old, I doubt I want to get out of bed every day too. Just behind the 4501, you'll see a large clamshell crane. That is, of course, the crane we use to fuel the steam locomotives with. We use that clamshell to scoop pulls up coal and drop it into the tender. It is very similar to a claw machine, except you do not get a prize at the end. Alright, everyone, welcome to East Chattanooga. Now, I have to ask, where did JW go? I saw you a minute ago. Where are you at? Oh, there you are. For those of you who did not see him earlier that were in the other car, that is JW there. That is our gentleman celebrating his birthday today. So everyone give him a happy birthday. Now, as you can see, we have actually reached the end of the line here. So we're going to pull the locomotive onto this turntable and spin it around for the return trip to Grand Junction. Now, this table you're looking at here was constructed in 1916 by the American Bridge Company and was used by the Central of Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia. After World War II, locomotives did become too large to fit on this table, so at that time it was moved to Cedartown, Georgia, where it would be used at the end of a branch line. We acquired it in the 1980s, moved it to this location, and it has been in use here ever since. This table is 80 feet long and it weighs in at around 80 tons. Now keep in mind, the average school bus only weighs about 6 or 7 tons. Now that locomotive there weighs in at about 125 tons, so when it is on top of the table, the overall weight between the two is going to be sitting right around 200 tons. So it may surprise you to know that this table was originally turned by hand. It was an Armstrong table. There would have been poles extending off the ends of the table, and it would have taken about 4 people to push those poles to spin the table around. Do we have any volunteers? All right, we got 1 there. Anyone else? 2? Say anyone else? We're gonna need 2 more. I might have to start picking some people. All right, we're gonna go 3, and let's do 4. Beatles there, come on over. Nah, I'm just kidding. We don't do it that way anymore. I'm just pulling a joke on everyone. Today we choose a small 25 horsepower motor under the operator shed here that our trainman Evan will be operating. Now, you may be wondering, how do they spin that much weight by hand? Well, to spin it by hand, and even to spin it by motor still today, we have to make sure the table is balanced. Now, the way we know this table is balanced is as the locomotive gets centered on the table. If you keep an eye on the front of the table down here where I'll be at, you will see it drop by a few inches. When it drops, we know the table is balanced. Now, our locomotive today is the 606. It was built in 1954 by General Motors for the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad, also known as the Milwaukee Road. This locomotive is classified as an SW1200, and what that means is it has 12 cylinders inside the engine and produces 1,200 horsepower. And the SW meaning that this locomotive was used primarily in switching service in freight yards. We actually acquired this locomotive in 2015 from the United States Navy, where they were selling it in Crane, Indiana. Once we got it here, we did restore it back to service, and it has been used in operation here ever since, both pulling our passenger trains and occasionally the odd freight train. On this end of the table any second now. Back there it is. Now if you have a look up in the cab there, you'll see our engineer Andrew. He's responsible for operating the locomotive and getting us here and back safely today. So everyone go ahead and give him a wave. Now while commonly referred to as diesel locomotives, the correct term for these engines is actually diesel electric. Meaning inside this engine there is that large diesel motor turning a generator. That generator of course does produce electricity, and that electricity is fed down to the traction motors that sit on each axle of this locomotive. And it is those traction motors that actually propel the locomotive, hence the term diesel electric. Now diesel locomotives have always been made that way, and that is still the way they are made today. Whether it's Norfolk Southern, CSX, or Union Pacific, those are all diesel electric locomotives. the correct track today, we still have to use the original method, and that would be the antique method of eyesight. Track 1, but we have just lined the locomotive up for track 2. That is so we can do what is called a runaround. The locomotive is going to go past our train beyond a switch. We will then throw that switch, and then the locomotive will reverse into the other side of our train and pull us back in the opposite direction. So what was front is now back, and what was the rear is now front. So you might be confused when you get back and forth, but we're going to be going the opposite direction. So that means for those of you that were 2 parties or less, if you did have empty seats across from you on the way over, you feel free to switch to those seats that were in front of you so you can face forward on the way back. Now, before we head back, if anyone has any questions, feel free to come over here and ask me. I do love questions, so please don't hesitate to ask. And for those of you that don't have any, you can go ahead and start making your way back to the train for the return trip to Grand Junction. Please make sure you just return to the same seat and car you rode in on the way over. And don't forget there are restrooms available in that depot if you need those as well. And I will see you back on board. And that is because this was not the original endpoint of this line here. We only had 3 miles donated to us. Originally, this line would have continued on over that road on a bridge that would have been supported by those concrete embankments and then on into downtown Chattanooga. Now, in fact, originally, this is where you would have gotten on the trains to begin with when this museum first began operations. The Southern Railway only originally donated 1.5 miles of track. So you would have gone on a train here, ridden through the tunnel just to this side of the Tunnel Boulevard Bridge, and then reversed back. Later on, the extra 1.5 miles was donated to the museum, and we were able to extend out to the Grand Junction site and made that into the property the main site of the museum. Now, for those of you who have not ridden with us before, I'd like to point out that the back shop over there in the distance is normally included as a part of the tour we give. We're not allowed to do that at this time for health department guidelines because we do not have the amount of space in there needed to ensure everyone the distance to spread 6 feet apart. So I'm going to tell you about it on board instead. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the back shop is where all the repairs, maintenance, and restorations do take place. Now, all railroads would have had a back shop just like that back in the day, but on a much larger scale. Now, the reason they were called back shops is, well, believe it or not, it's because they were in the back of the property, hence the name. Now, that back shop is equipped with a number of features that allows us to work on our equipment, such as a 4-foot deep drop pit, a 10-ton overhead crane, a machine shop, and then most importantly, the wheel shop at the back. And that is because we have a very unique piece of machinery back there, and that would be a steam locomotive driving wheel lathe at 90 inches in diameter. It's such a rare piece of machinery nowadays that we often get in shipments of driving wheels from other steam locomotives across the nation and do work for other railroads, theme parks, museums, and tourist railroads. Now, in terms of steam locomotive restorations, back in the golden age of steam, a locomotive could have been rebuilt in about a month. But for us, for example, with one of our operating steam locomotives, the Southern Railway 630, it took us 10 years, 2001 to 2011. And that is because they had 3 things back then that we do not have today. And those are the parts, the amount of skilled labor, and the money. So if a part breaks from one of the locomotives, we can't order a new part online or just go to a hardware store to pick one up. Believe me, I've tried. AutoZone does not have them. So we have to machine new parts from scratch right in the back shop there. Next to the amount of skilled labor. During the golden age of steam, there would have been about 100 to 150 people working on a single locomotive at a time, doing all kinds of various tasks in an assembly line-like fashion. But today, that is a very rare, specialized, and sought-after skill. On average, we'll have just 1 or 2 people at a time working on those projects. And then the last, of course, is the money. So today, steam locomotives on average do cost a little over $1 million a piece to restore back to operation, and we are a small non-profit educational organization. So where do we get that kind of money? Well, one is our ticket sales, of course. A portion of every ticket sold does go towards the reservation fund. Next is our freight service. We do handle a small amount of freight in the Chattanooga area. And then last, of course, is donations. Now, Another reason we're doing this work here is because we are trying to preserve history. In fact, one of our goals here is educate the public on the history and the importance of the American railroads. And to put that in perspective, keep in mind that this station did not begin to evolve until the trains started to appear. That's when the station really did start to evolve and expand, was when the railroads first appeared. In fact, it was the railroads that did eventually help us expand westward and connect the coast. It was just last year, actually, that we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, May 10, 1869. Before that line was completed, it would have taken you months to travel from coast to coast. It would have been very dangerous. After it was completed, that travel time dropped down to just a few days. It was much safer. Other railroads were also very important for the war efforts. Civil War, World War I, World War II. If it wasn't for these railroads handling the mass transportation of troops and supplies for the war efforts, we could have easily lost in one of those wars. And even just for travel back then as well. Before the airlines and the interstates existed, to travel long distance you had to go by train. So there would have been no vacationing, no traveling for business, no going to visit family and things of that matter. And then of course even today they're still very important because today's railroads do handle a majority of this nation's freight. It is the cheapest and most efficient way that freight is moved today. So for example, most of the items you purchase in stores or online on a daily basis at some point along the journey are most likely transported by train. So it would be much more difficult to obtain things such as your groceries without these railroads. Now this time, just sit back, relax, enjoy the rest of the ride back to Grand Junction. I will be rolling the train, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me. I'll be happy to answer your questions for you. I'll do my best to answer them. And if I don't have an answer to your question, I will make something up that sounds good.
folks, everybody doing okay? Needles, you okay? Yep. Melon, you okay? All right.
In a few more minutes, we'll be arriving back at Junction Station. We do thank everyone for riding with us today at the Tennessee Valley Road Museum and hope you did enjoy your excursion. If you do choose to visit with us again in the future, as we enter our next few phases of reopening, we will begin offering some of our longer trips again in the future. We have already begun offering the dinner on the diner again. And then in the future, very soon we'll start bringing back the Chickamauga Turn, these later next year, the Summer Steam Special, and eventually our holiday trips such as the Halloween Area Express, the North Pole Limited, our annual day on the Thomas, and our Hiwassee trips out of Etowah, Tennessee. Now we do thank everyone for your patience and understanding today as we implement health department guidelines to ensure everyone's safety on board the train today. And now we will be unloading the train by car color again, so please remain seated until your car color is called once we come to a stop. Now if you've not done so already, if you have not checked out the display yard out by the parking lot, I do highly encourage you to go have a look at that. There's lots of equipment down there on display, including a steam locomotive built for passenger service that did work for a Canadian railroad, and a few cabooses. Or would that be cabooses? Cabooses, cabooses, cabisi. Anyway, there's some red things out there. Also, if you'd like to see the locomotive turn around for our next trip, it will be doing so on what is called the Y, so W-Y-E. It is a triangular shaped junction in the track that is in front of Grand Junction Station, so the locomotive will be doing what is essentially a 3-point turn. So if you'd like a good chance to get some photo and video of the locomotive up close, you can go do that out front of the station here. It will be doing so as soon as we come to a stop. If you'd like to go back into the station to visit the gift shop for the deli, we do ask that you go around the building and enter through the front door, as there are designated entrance and exit doors at this time. If you're looking for something in the gift shop, I do highly recommend the documentary And Then There Was One. It's a feature-length documentary on the history of the Southern 4501, the locomotive that was going to pull our train today, but you did see it at East Chattanooga. And if you visit the deli, they do have some great items in there, including locally made ice cream from Fluffy's Ice Cream Company. That does include 2 original flavors you can only get at this depot. Those are the Smokin' Cinders and the Rocky Railroad. And please make sure you do not forget any personal belongings before departing the train today, such as hats, glasses, keys, wallets, purses, cell phones, husbands, wives, and kids. And if you did enjoy your trip today, my name is Zach with an H. If you did not enjoy it, in that case, my name is Zach with a K. And if anyone is visiting from out of town and would like some recommendations on other places to visit, some of my favorite places to go to are, of course, the Tennessee Aquarium, Ruby Falls, Rock City, and then the the Lookout Mountain Incline Railway. And if you've never been on that ride, that is, of course, another train ride you can take in Chattanooga. It is one of the steepest passenger railways in the world. It's 72.7 degrees at its steepest angle going up the side of Lookout Mountain, so that is nearly vertical. Of course, that is a cable-powered railway. There is no locomotive that pulls that train up the mountain. But I do recommend having go and checking that out if you've never been there before.
After we returned to Grand Junction, we caught the 606 running the Y before we headed to the house. The Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum is a true rail fan's paradise. We hope to return again soon, and this time, hopefully we'll be able to tour the repair shop at East Chattanooga. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked what you saw. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And ring the notification bell to be notified about my future uploads.